Welcome to Amp Up Your Sales Seminar. In case we haven't had the pleasure of meeting you virtually or in person, I'm Patricia Fripp, your host, and we will be talking to Andy Paul, who is a best-selling author, a sales speaker, and a coach to companies of all sizes. We want to engage with you. We have hundreds of registrants, and we know that some of you will be watching the replay. However, for those of you who've made this a priority and you are with us live, we want to know a little more about you, and you can ask Andy questions and certainly answer poll questions. And the very important part of the team to help you do that is the Director of Client Experience for Fripp Virtual Training. He is also the moderator of all our seminars. So, Paul, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see an area that has a chat box. Within this chat box, you'll be able to ask your short, specific questions that will be answered during the call. Make sure to enter your questions before the end of the call so we have enough time to cover them. In addition to the chat box, just below it, there will be a polling area. When a polling question comes up, it'll pop up on that area. Select your answer, click vote, and then we'll go over the results during the call. And just as a side note, Google's been doing some updates recently, so if we do flash away, make sure to remain on the same page that you're on. We'll be back momentarily. And if you don't see us after a moment, just click the reconnect button at the bottom of the screen. Thank you, and our first poll is going to be, are you a manager or sales professional? You'll have about a minute to answer, and additional polling questions will come up as we go along.
Yes, so watch for the polling questions. However, let's get to work, and we'll give you the answer to your polls at an appropriate time. So Andy, as well as being a speaker and of course a coach, he has his great books. He wins the prize for the best book subtitles, and I'm going to read them exactly so you see why I would make that claim.
The honor of dubious distinction.
Yeah, exactly. And Andy also has a great online training, as I do for presentation skills. We'll show you that later. So listen to the name of his books. Of course, Amp Up Sales, How to Move Customers to Make Fast and Favorable Decisions, which tells you all you want to know about buying the book. Then 2, Zero Time Selling, 10 Essential Steps to Accelerate Every Company's Sales. Andy is not one of these just great speakers and authors who hasn't actually done much. So Andy, why don't you start with giving our friends a snapshot of your sales career?
Sure. Well, I started my career in sales. Actually, my first job in sales was when I was in high school. I was selling women's shoes at JCPenney's. So that was an interesting experience in all itself. But since in my professional career, I've been in the technology business, or was in the technology business for about 25 years, working for companies like Apple in the early days, and a number of venture-funded startups, some of which were quite successful, and some of which, as I like to say, were glorious failures. We seem to have to balance the scales there. And in the year 2000, I started my own company, Zero Time Selling, Inc., to help companies, primarily small and mid-sized enterprises and startups that maybe we're a little bit stuck in sales and weren't really sure how they're going to be able to move forward, and bringing the experience I had working with a lot of small companies and startups myself, working with my clients, give them a strategy to say, okay, how do we move from where we are to where we want to be in the shortest time possible? And then starting about 2010, I started writing books, and I just published 2 books, Zero Time Selling and Amp Up Your Sales. And just recently, about 6 months ago, started a daily podcast for sales. So we're interviewing all the top experts, including Ms. Fripp here, about sales, marketing, management, leadership, training, anything that can help you get an edge in terms of moving your sales forward.
And anyone can find about that if they just go to andypaul.com?
If they go to andypaul.com, the name of the podcast is Accelerate with an exclamation mark, and they can find it on iTunes and Stitcher as well.
Good. Well, just for you to know, Andy, 56% are sales managers and 44% are sales professionals, so fairly close. And they all want to know, and Paul and I want to know, how do we amp up sales, preferably in 0 time?
Yeah. How do we do it immediately, right? It's a small ask, right? Well, let's look at some of the basics about what you do to be able to scale sales. And yeah, a perspective I like to give audiences when I talk to them is to think about how much did you win your last deal by, right? I mean, what was your margin of victory? You know, were you 5% better, 10% better, 20% better than your competitors? And the fact is, you really don't know. There's no real way to know. And so the perspective you need to have when you're looking at how do we win business, to say, look, we just need to be 1% better than our competitors in order to win the customer's business. And this final margin really often boils down to the intangibles surrounding how you sell. It's less about what you sell, the product and service, because we live and work in this era where there's this influx of competitors, and we've got this unending pace of technological change. And what happens is that when the customers are confronted with so much choice, everyone begins to look alike. And so our task as sellers is how do we create some differentiation? Well, that first line of differentiation in order to grow our sales really begins with the salesperson who's sitting in front of the customer or is on the phone with them. So the perspective is if we want to be 1% better than our competitors, then we're going to do that based on how we sell more than what we sell. And so I want to run through maybe 5 or 6 quick steps about how you quickly build the rapport and the trust with the customer that enables you to get in that competitive advantage position. And so everything I've talked about for the next few minutes really falls into the category of what I call how do you win the sale before you win the order? Meaning, what are the things you can do to get the customer in a position where they're thinking in their mind, this is who I want to do business with. And I can look back at my own career. When I was selling for about 15 years, selling large, multi-million-dollar, complex communication networks, and I always knew the point when the customer reached in their mind to say, look, this is who I'm going to do business with. And this could have been a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months before I actually got the order. But I knew from that point on I was fighting from the lead position. And that's the position you want to be in any sort of deal that you're working. So one of the first things to work on to help quickly build rapport and trust with the customer to put you in that winning the sale position is to really focus on optimizing the first perceptions, the first impressions you create with the prospect or the customer. And so you have to think that there is no such thing as an unimportant sales interaction with a prospect. Everyone should be considered to be of equal value because you don't know how the customer is prioritizing their perception of you in that interaction. And so when you first meet someone, science shows and research shows that people form impressions in as quickly as 1/4 of a second about you and your product and your trustworthiness and your capabilities. So these first impressions, being prepared when you first interact with a prospect, becomes very important. And the power of perceptions is that positive perceptions create positive outcomes. And you think about that in terms of the placebo effect when you take medications. You could be taking a placebo in a clinical trial that gives you some improvement in your condition compared to the real medication. Well, that placebo effect is very powerful, and it works in sales as well. So creating powerful first impressions is a way to create impressions in the customer's mind that ultimately lead to positive outcomes. So focus on creating positive perception. Secondly is accelerate your responsiveness. Responsiveness in sales is not just about being, what it is about the combination of replying quickly, but having the information the customer needs in answer to questions or inquiry. Because you can be fast to respond to a customer inquiry, but if there's no content in your response, if you're just fast and saying you get back to somebody in 5 minutes when they've sent you an inquiry, but you can't answer a question they have, then you're not being responsive. So we live in an environment where customers want to be able to make good decisions quickly. They want to make purchase decisions investing less of their time. IDC, the research firm, did a study a couple years ago saying that in the B2B space, customers want to be able to make decisions up to 40% faster. And what's holding them back are us as salespeople. We're holding back. We're the ones that aren't providing them the information on a timely basis they need to be able to move forward. So to be able to accelerate your responsiveness really has a couple benefits for you in terms of your sales. One is research shows that if you are the first seller with the answer for the customers, then your odds of winning their business go up substantially. In some cases as high as 50-55%. So that's pretty substantial odds. And secondly is you're just furthering creating that impression that you're a reliable, trustworthy vendor that they want to do business with. So if you optimize your first perceptions, first impressions, accelerate your responsiveness, include in that the ability to follow up faster. Now we think that follow-up is sort of a skill that all salespeople have, but the fact is that's just not the case, right? Unless it's something that's managed, it's measured, your follow-up rate of your follow-up is, unless you measure it, it's never going to get better, and it's something that's really important to your customers. A couple years ago, the CEO of IBM sent out a video message to the entire workforce in which she said, look, we're being hammered by our competition and by our customers because we're taking too long to respond to inquiries, we're taking too long to respond to questions, and she put a stake in the ground and said that effective immediately, we're going to respond to every customer inquiry and every customer question within 24 hours. So that was setting a metric that they could measure their responsiveness to their customers. And that's really important to be able to do, and that starts with follow-up. So there's a couple of areas of follow-up to talk about. One is when customers send you leads. One of the latest studies that was published, a year and a half ago by InsideSales.com about lead follow-up was that 73% of inbound sales leads are still not followed up. So think about that. Your company has invested hard dollars in generating leads and generating demand for your product, and when the customer contacts your firm, virtually 3/4 of the leads are not followed up. Now, what's interesting, and when we look at other studies, is there a study, I forget who did, I think it might have been IDC or maybe Forrester Group, that said that found in the business-to-business space that 51% of the orders go to the first seller to respond to the customer. So there's this huge built-in advantage to be what I call the first mover advantage for sales. So this is where follow-up really becomes critical, because what happens is we've trained customers not to expect anyone to follow up with them. And so if you do follow up, well, suddenly you've created this advantage that the competitors are just missing. And so the faster you call back, the greater your chance of converting a lead into a prospect. And then you're creating this lasting perception in the mind of the prospect, wow, these people got back to me really quickly. That's very powerful. And I write about an example of this in my first book, Zero Time Selling, with a company I worked with that was taking on average about 4 days to respond to their sales leads, and they weren't even responding to all of them at that. And so the first day I went to work with the client is we changed that. And it took about 5 minutes to change. And so we just changed the process. We had all the leads go to their sales admin. The sales admin assigned the leads to sales reps based on their territory. And the key step was that at 4:30 every afternoon, the CEO of the company logged into their CRM system and checked to see if the leads had been followed up and the action items have been closed out. And immediately had 100% compliance with lead follow-up. But the funny thing that happened was is we continued down that line and we made it a little bit faster. We got so all the leads were followed up within the same business day and then within 4 hours, is the sales reps started to see the results change. They started to see more of their prospects convert into qualified opportunities, and more of those qualified opportunities convert into orders. And what happened is they're creating this powerful impression in the mind of the prospects about their responsiveness and how desirable it was to do business with them. And we got to the point with that customer where every sales lead they had, and they were getting a fair number every day, were being responded to within 30 minutes with a phone call, with somebody that understood the product. And really on the basis of that type of follow-up, they were able to more than double their sales in less than 3 years just through that change in their sales process. And it was really powerful impact on the prospects.
That is incredible. In fact, we have the larger percentage of our viewers are from small enterprises, but for the 22% from large enterprises, Andy, what I remember from zero-time selling is that one of the ways that people can be responsive with the right information is to have people you don't traditionally think as salespeople. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I think that what you want to do, and one of the steps that I recommend for people in zero-time selling, is that you use non-traditional salespeople, what I call the sharp end of the stick, people with the greatest product knowledge or domain expertise, and put them closest to the customer, i.e. in sales positions. And I've made a career of converting engineers and software developers and other people into sales professionals. And customers want to spend as little time as possible dealing with sales. And it's not that they necessarily hate sales, but they don't necessarily find value in most of the interactions with sales. A Gartner group did a study that showed that 82% of senior executives found no value in their interactions with sales reps. So the problem is really the sales reps don't have the domain expertise and the knowledge to add value at that level. And so what I recommend for companies of all sizes is look internally, especially if you're selling a more technical product. Look internally inside your company and see who is there that you might be able to convince to consider a career change. And the way you do that is by telling them that sales is not about persuading people to do something they don't want to do. It's about providing a service. And you truly are. I mean, if you don't have a service orientation in your selling, you're not going to win as much as you want, because customers will see that you're just there sort of self-motivated, as opposed to being motivated by helping them solve a problem. And that's really the key.
Good. Yes, I work with a company, Solar Turbines, and that was it. It was so complex to understand. The only people who could talk with authority are people who spent years working on them. And of course, they were the experts, so they're not even perceived as a salesperson. They are a seasoned, smart person who can answer any question that was ever asked because of their experience. So that's great. And anyone who wants to, Paul, do we have any questions so far, or is everyone hanging on Andy's words the way I am?
Everyone is hanging on every word. There's no questions right now.
Okay, perfect. Well, feel free, because I'm about to ask some questions on your behalf.
All right. Well, let me add a really key point, a couple other key points here, because as you said, it's great to have the domain expertise because they can answer questions. But the best thing about people with domain expertise is they can ask the right questions. And that's really the key, right? Because when you interact with prospects, you want to lead with questions. And so what I'm giving you are a set of tools here to help you, as I said, quickly build rapport and trust with the customer. Well, one of the primary ways to do that is to be sincerely and authentically interested in their problem. And the way you demonstrate that is by asking the right questions. And so I have a formula that I call the ask, don't tell formula. And basically what it says is that every time you as a sales rep or sales manager, you're talking to a prospect or a customer, every time you have the opportunity to state a fact, ask a question instead. So you could say, hey, Mr. Prospect, our product or our service does X, Y, Z. But what if you ask the question is, Mr. Prospect, now what value would it be to you if you had the capability to do X, Y, Z? How would that impact your sales? How would that impact your throughput? How would that impact your manufacturing yield? Whatever the relevant thing is. But turn the facts into questions. And then that just continues, because they'll fill in the blanks. Customers want to demonstrate their expertise to you as well as you want to demonstrate yours to them. And so get them talking, and they'll talk more. And ask questions. Lead with good, insightful questions, and that's the value of having people that have domain expertise. And if you don't have domain expertise, you're going to have to learn some of these questions. But one tool you can use as a learning tool for yourself as well as for the client is if you have a couple good, insightful questions that you ask the customer that will cause them to sort of pause and think about the answer, is your follow-up question It's going to be along the lines of, well, that's very interesting. Can you tell me more about that? And you can ask that, can you tell me more about it, several times in a row. You know, sort of like I used to equate it to like a small toddler always asking the why question, right? Why is the sky blue? Why is the what? You know, and they sort of will say why. Do that same thing with your prospects. You know, drill down. Tell me more. That's an interesting point. I think I understand, but tell me a little bit more about that. And you'll get the customers opening up. And you as a sales rep or as a sales manager, whoever is interacting, you're going to learn a lot in terms of the next questions you should be asking.
And I am sure, just as in a social situation, if you do more asking than speaking, you are considered a brilliant conversationalist.
Oh, yeah.
We're very familiar with the expression that our prospects won't argue with themselves. So the more that you can take their conversation and put back, this is a brilliant suggestion, which sounds simple. However, I doubt if any of us do it as well as you've just explained.
Well, and thank you. I mean, let me add one more point that sort of follows up to that too, which is that, you know, we've talked about accelerating your responsiveness, creating positive impressions, asking the right questions, you know, really being focused on the buyer, being mindful and deliberate and present for them. Is sort of the last of these opening steps to talk about is make sure, because I'd said before, there is no such thing as an unimportant sales interaction, is make sure that you're maximizing the value you deliver in every sales touch. And this really becomes the heart of this. And this is all these things I'm talking about here, the value of them to you as a salesperson or a sales manager is that they're completely under your control. You know, you can't control necessarily what your product does, you can't control the features, you can't control how it's priced, but these actions, follow-up, creating great first impressions, maximizing the value you deliver, these are all things you can control that will differentiate you from your competitors and will make a difference in terms of your ability to win the order. So maximizing value is as simple as it says, is that, you know, every time you interact with a prospect, no matter how large or how small the interaction was, an email, voicemail, voice call, in-person call, is you need to have a value plan. And that plan says, look, what information, questions, insights, data am I going to provide the prospect during this interaction that will move them at least one step closer to making a decision? And two, as a result of having received this value, what steps are they committed to take? So you need to know the answer to both those questions before any interaction with a prospect. So, like I said, it could be an email, it could be you're leaving a voicemail. What is the value you're going to deliver to them in that voicemail? And what do you want them to do as a result of giving that? And I give an example that's a general example in my book is, you know, salespeople are guilty, and we all, at some point in our careers, we've all made what I call the check-in call, right? Hey, Mr. Prospect, this is Andy. Yeah, I don't have anything new. I just want to check in and see how you're doing. And the problem with that is that the customer invested some of their time to take that call, and you gave them nothing in return for that time. And that imbalance, if it persists, you know, the customer is going to stop giving you their time. Because that's the bargain at the heart of sales. The customer gives you some of their time. They invest some time in you. They're expecting something in return. They need to have an ROI for that investment. So if you really focus on saying, gosh, how do I maximize the value for every interaction? The example I was going to give is that check-in call. Instead of doing a check-in call, let's say when you get a new prospect, you set up a series of Google alerts for that prospect. So you put in some keywords, customer's name, prospect's name, company name, maybe the technology you're involved with, maybe their name plus the technology or the product type you're selling to them, maybe their industry. And every day Google will send you information in the form of an email with links to articles or white papers or PDFs or what have you. And so instead of doing a check-in call, maybe you send an email to a prospect and you say, Mr. Prospect, hey, I was thinking about you this morning when I read this article about how companies like yours are using technology like ours. You know, just as a basic example. There are two key points in this article I think we should talk about. Do you have time Tuesday at 9 a.m. to talk? Well, you went from a check-in call to something that is delivering value to them because they're going to read that article. And having read that article, you're starting to train them to the fact that every time you communicate with them, there's something in there for them that's of value. And giving them a reason to pick up the phone and talk to you to review that article.
Very good. Now, looking at our results, do our, at least on the live call, are they selling a product or a service? The highest percentage sell a service. So before I get to more questions on behalf of our audience, is there a difference in the approach between products and services?
No, fundamentally no. So, yeah, the steps that prospects go through to make a decision are the same. And so the steps you need to go through in order to help them move from their initial point of interest to making a decision are the same as well.
Good. Paul, are there any questions yet?
Absolutely. We have 2 right now.
Okay, fine. Well, we'll take them before I get to mine.
First question is, when selling to a large corporation and businesses, how do you recommend finding the economic buyer?
All right. Excuse me. I didn't mean to choke at the question. It's a good question. That's purely coincidental. So, yeah, I sort of, if you've read The Challenger Customer, the new book put out by the folks from CEB that wrote The Challenger Sale, they talk about the fact the research showing there's 5.4 buyers or key influencers in every decision, of which the economic decision maker is one. I talk in my book that you want to find what I call the actual decision maker, and I give a tool in zero-time selling to do this. And the actual decision maker is the person who ultimately at the end of the day cares the most about the value that's generated by the product or service they're buying. And the thing to keep in mind is that in large enterprises in particular, is that 95% plus of the products and services you're going to sell are not strategic to the buyer, right? So they don't necessarily raise to the level of having CEO approval. And so your job really becomes is how do you find what I call the actual decision maker, which oftentimes is the economic decision maker. How do you find that person within the hierarchy? And I have a tool in my book, Zero Time Selling, that enables you to sort of plot on a scale the strategic value of the product you're selling. And it requires some real pragmatism on your part to do that. But once you've done that and located where your product fits on sort of a strategic scale for the customer, then you can really start honing in as the people, the level of the company, where the people are going to have the greatest, have the greatest concern and care about the value that you provide. And that's going to change from company to company, but it just requires a little digging at that point. Once you've sort of settled where you are, it just requires a little bit of digging to find out. But what you be careful is don't oversell. What I call oversell is don't go in at the assumption that the decision needs to be made in the C-suite. Is really at the opposite end, is really decide at what level the true decision is actually made. Now the C-suite may validate a decision or a recommendation made by someone, but it's really that key advocate that you need to find. And it requires a little bit of digging, either through LinkedIn or through your contacts within an organization. But again, you could do a lot of that sourcing on LinkedIn to find the right person that cares the most about it.
Good, and thank you for the plug, because next week I have another event with Kurt Shaver, who is, of course, an expert at doing exactly that with LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And everyone on this call will be invited to that. Again, it's our gift to you. Paul, what is the other question?
It's from something that Andy said earlier. It says, how many articles would be reasonable to send on a monthly basis?
Well, it depends on the situation. So if you have an active prospect, somebody that's engaged in their buying process, then there really is no limit, right? Because you're trying to always uncover what are the unanswered questions that exist, or sometimes even the unasked questions that they might have. So in that case, there really is, as I said, no limit. The other scenario is that maybe somebody that you've engaged with that maybe isn't quite ready to be a prospect, but you believe they will be a good prospect maybe at some point in the future, is then you want to put them on some sort of nurture campaign. I call it a value-based persistence, right? And so what you're going to do is you're going to map out. You think, okay, look, I want to stay engaged with this firm, and I think I'm going to estimate that it's going to be 6 months before they're ready, and maybe they've told me it's going to be 6 months before they're completely ready to engage on a full-time basis on a buying journey for this product that you're selling. Excuse me, so I would map out one good piece of content per month, actually, that I think takes them from where they are currently in their investigation to where you think they should be when they really start the full-fledged investigation. So you're going to help them move through the early parts of their buyer's journey before they officially launch that effort. And yeah, they could go to your website, they could find some of the information, but you want to curate the content that you think will help move them through those initial stages of their funnel. And it's going to be different from product to product, but think about, you've got a product you've sold before, you understand the process people go through, is what do people need in the early stages of their investigations to begin to understand the value that you provide and to begin to create this vision in their mind of what it would be like to use your product and the value they would receive from using your product. And so that could be white papers, could be case studies, it could be testimonials from customers, like a video testimonial, but map it out specifically and then put them on a monthly drip. Maybe as you get closer, as you check in with them occasionally, maybe you'll find that you need to rev that up a little bit, maybe go twice a month until they're ready to engage full time.
Okay, perfect. And now, the first piece of advice you give in your book is how to simplify your selling. So how do you simplify your selling, especially if you have a somewhat complex product or sale?
Well, the fundamentals are the same, right? Because what I talked about early on is the things that you can control that will differentiate you.
Yes.
And so when I'm talking about simplifying, it's about really being laser focused on those items. So the first one is make every sales touch count. Yeah. Because you can't waste the customer's time. Customers, actually, an economist named Herbert Samuelson won a Nobel Prize based on his study, Herbert Simon, excuse me, based on study of how busy people allocate slices of their time to various tasks and demand on it. And what they found is basically that people make economic decisions about that. What do I get the biggest ROI for my time that I invest? And so if you're not providing value to the prospect on every sales touch, they're going to make that decision you're not worth their time and you won't get additional time. So you have to make every sales touch count, be absolutely responsive. This is the critical thing, the thing that we can control the highest as individual salespeople is how responsive we are to our prospects. If we prioritize that, that makes a huge difference. And then third is just have to clarify your offer. People have to understand what it is that you do. And this is a common failing, is that you could have, I've seen this many times, where I've done ride-alongs where sales reps go on their initial call and the customer walks away and says, I'm not really sure I know what you do.
Okay, good. And you talk about in your book the new sales funnel. Now, most of us are familiar with the idea of a sales funnel. What's your new funnel?
Well, what's new is how far the prospects don't enter the funnel at the top anymore. Is basically, the analogy is always a funnel. Prospects enter the top, customers come out the bottom. The fact is, prospects are going through some percentage of their buying journey before they ever interact with the salesperson. Now, there's some matter of debate among various factions in the sales world about this, but again, CEB with the latest book, Challenger Customers, put the numbers around 55-60% of the way customers are through their buying journey before they first interact with sales. And this is information they can find online, they can find in LinkedIn discussion groups or various other industry sources online. So you can't be stuck in the old-fashioned mode of doing top-of-funnel selling when you first interact with new prospects. So I see this mistake all the time where sales reps go in and the first interaction with the prospect is they want to talk about the company, and their products and the things they do, and they do sort of the standard corporate pitch. And that's a waste of the prospect's time. They know that already. They've been on your website. They don't care about that anymore. All they care about is what you can do to help solve their problem, help them achieve their goals. And so the new sales funnel is saying, look, your prospects enter the funnel about halfway down. Your first interaction with them has to be geared around what would you do with them at that stage of their buyer's journey. And it's really more about questions and less about statements of fact about you.
Good, and this is very much how I work with people with their sales conversations and presentations. And the next question, which you talk about, which certainly matches what I do in my work, is building compelling sales stories.
Right.
So what are your ingredients? I'll share mine later.
Well, the sales stories I talk about are used in very specific cases, which is, how do you illustrate the value of what your product or service does in as concise a way as possible? And so the way to think about this is, if someone were to ask you the question, what do you do? Well, the typical response is say, well, I work for a company, we're 10 years old, we manufacture da 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 da. And so what I say instead is, build a little 30-second sales story that answers 4 questions, which is, what problem is your customer trying to solve? Why was your expertise relevant to them and the problem they were trying to solve? Why did they decide to buy from you, and what was the value they've received from investing in your product or service? And you can weave that very easily into, as I said, a 30-second story. So when someone says, what do? You say, well, let me illustrate that by telling a story about what we've done for customer XYZ. They had this problem. They came to us because they had gone on our website and they had seen through testimonials that we had solved similar problems. They chose us because we had put together a plan for them to be able to increase their market share by 20%. And now, 18 months later, they not only achieved the 20%, but they increased their market share by 25%. Well, that took 20 seconds to say, and that's that simple. And suddenly what happens now is you've engaged the prospect in a way in a story, because suddenly as soon as you start talking about other customers, they start putting themselves in that customer's shoes. Because we all know that's the power of story. It engages the emotions and the interest of the listener. And it gives them the ability to sort of take a mental test drive of your product, sort of vicariously through the experience of the prospect. So compare the value of saying a short sales story like that versus reciting 10 things about your company and how great you are in the garage you were founded in, and the impact is substantially different.
Perfect. All right, Paul, and are there any more questions that have come in before I get to my next one?
There are. What do you recommend when a client goes silent?
That is the hardest one, right? So what I recommend is look in the mirror and ask yourself, what information are they waiting for to hear from me? Because when people make decisions, they go through a very logical process in their mind, and scientists have mapped this out. And what they find is that when people make decisions, they go through these steps in order, and they don't skip a step, and they have certain information requirements for each step of their decision process. So if you are working through your buying process with the prospect, and they suddenly go radio silent, the first thing you want to investigate is that perhaps you haven't provided them the information they need to take the next step in that journey. They're waiting. That's just the way that people make decisions. They wait until they get that information. But in the meantime, they're moving ahead with your competitors. So what I do is, when I run the same situation, is I'll ask the customer, what is the information you need from me right now to move one step closer to making a decision? And usually they'll tell me that, well, we're sort of waiting for you because we never really resolved this issue about ABC. So ask that question of the buyer first. That's the most likely thing that's happened. The second thing you want to consider is that perhaps they've made a decision that you're just not a fit for them, or that you're not making productive use of their time. But in either event, there's still some additional qualification needs to be done at that point in time, because customers don't have an incentive to tell you to go away in the midst of a deal. Oftentimes they need to be able to justify to their bosses that, yeah, we've evaluated all the competitors and so on. So even though they may no longer be considering you because maybe you're just not a fit, they won't necessarily tell you until the end. So you need to continually qualify and requalify the prospect, and to make sure that you're still on a track to provide the value that they need for the solution that they need.
All right. Paul, you have another one?
Yes, and excuse me, obviously not the entire sales conversation, but someone asks, can Andy and Patricia simulate a hypothetical conversation with a prospect?
Realistically, with how much we want to cover, I don't, unless, Andy, you have a quick.
You know, I don't have a quick setup. If I prepared, we could have prepared it, but yeah, I spontaneously, it might be hard.
How about next time you come on?
Well, next time definitely we'll do it. But I mean, any conversation that I would have, especially initial conversation, if I knew, Patricia's business, I'm going to lead with questions. That's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to start with a personal question. Oftentimes, if it's an in-person call and I'm in somebody's office, I'll scan the office to make sure, I understand something personal about them, or I've gone online beforehand and checked what their interests are on, Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. So I have some way to engage them at a level that's just not purely business to start, because this is a personal relationship we're building with someone. And then quickly, once we get that sort of out of the way and have some level of engagement, is ask tough questions that would force them to think about their answers.
Okay, good. And I know that we have plenty more questions, and also what I would love to do, because for those of you who would love access to Andy's brilliance 24/7, Paul, can we go over to Zero Time Selling VT? And as you can see under my name, we have Fripp VT, Fripp Virtual Training, which is on presentation skills and sales presentations. So we just want you to get comfortable with knowing how you can get to, and I know you can take a free trial,
yes,
as we do.
Right.
So let's go to Paul. All right. So Zero Time Selling, it's what you do to win. So should we take a tour? Andy?
Well, I'd encourage people to go there and take a tour. It's just a short video overview, but they can register for a free trial if they wish, and either by clicking the button on the screen that you see there, or if people want to do this via their phones, they can text to the number 96000, text the word trust, simple word, TRUST, and they can enroll in the free trial and check it out. And it's really, the focus is, as we've talked about here, what are the intangibles that I can bring to my selling to differentiate me from my competitors, to help me quickly build rapport and trust with my prospects and customers, so that I can win more business.
Perfect. And so from there, Paul, let's just come back and answer another couple of questions.
Sure.
And we want everyone to certainly go over and take a trial. And I would also encourage you can take a trial at Fripp VT. So you can go to Fripp VT. We'll show you that later. Take a trial. You can get a chapter on openings, on stories, and sales presentations. And if you want to do it with your mobile device, of course, you can put 96,000 and put Fripp. You see, I use my name more, Andy, even though Paul has one less letter.
Yeah, I needed 5 letters, so.
Okay, good. All right, so Paul, are there another couple of quick questions before we go to the next segment, which is, when you are in front of your prospect, how can you more effectively ask the questions, get off to a good start, and as a Fripp secret ingredient into your sales stories?
Well, I think this question will actually tie into that subject. Is it still valuable to probe to discover a prospect's dominant buying motive?
Yes. So I have a little contrarian view on that. Maybe is, there seems to be a lot of focus on trying to say, how do we uncover the pain point? And maybe just because I'm more of an optimist, is I really like to focus on what the customer wants to achieve. And so instead of focusing on sort of pain resolution. I really want to focus on, because I really ultimately think people are making investments in new products and services to achieve a certain goal. And I don't think the goal is resolving pain. I think the goal is growing their business, growing market share, becoming more profitable. These are all positive things. So what I would structure your sort of initial questioning around is part of it is saying, well, where do you want to be in 12 to 18 months, right? What do you want to have achieved in your business? And where are you today in relation to that goal? And what's your plan from getting from here to there? And what you're going to find is that in that last question, when you're sort of probing that gap between where they are now and where they want to be, is they're quickly going to come around to understand that you are the solution to help them get there.
Okay. We will find there will probably be a lot more questions that we can get to, but Andy has very generously asked to any questions that we don't get to. He will certainly answer them in his blog and direct you to his various resources where you can get more detail. Isn't that fit?
Actually, I'll answer them individually. If people want to send me an email, I will answer your questions individually. So send your questions to andy@zerotimeselling.com, and I will respond.
Okay, that's very generous of you. And Paul, can you go over to Fripp VT, so we'll show them what happens once you've got the prospect, and I totally agree with Andy about the importance of asking questions and not the standard, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is who we do business with, which certainly we don't, we don't want to sell the same as everybody else. We want to amp up our sales and be distinctive and memorable for all the right reasons.
Right.
And just in case you're not aware, we do have a LinkedIn group, a Fripp VT LinkedIn group, which focuses, it's very active around sales presentations and speaking in general. You do not have to be a VT user to belong to that group. So go to LinkedIn, Fripp VT. So when you come to my virtual training, Fripp VT, you see, of course, all speaking is public speaking, whether your audience is 1, 5, 50, or 500. We'd like you to take a trial, but Paul, why don't you go into the training center? And again, once you go into Andy's, it will be very similar. So Paul, let's just show them, why don't we start with the opening of a sales presentation, just so whether you go to mine, you go to Andy's, you'll see how interactive and fun the learning is. This is digestible chunks, because the dirty little secret about training, and Andy and I make a very good living in the training industry, is that when you have great content, which we both have, with experts, which we are, and an enthusiastic audience, which we have 99% of the time, chances are you will not remember more than 30% of what you learned after 2 weeks. The only way to genuinely learn skills so they become second nature is through repetition and reinforcement, which is why Andy and I have both invested in these learning systems for you. In case you cannot afford to have a consultant like Andy to your business, then you can certainly get his ideas.
Yes.
So, Paul, if you bring up Superstar Sales Presentations. Welcome to Superstar Sales Presentations, the Inside Secrets. In this course, you will learn the secrets of making your sales presentations more compelling. This will give you a seemingly unfair advantage over your competition. If you're ready, click the Start Training button. What do poor sales presentations really cost? In Chapter 1, you heard in some cases $9 million a year. For some of my clients, even more. However, there are costs beyond the actual dollars from the lost sale. How many people do you think worked on the request for proposal, or prospecting and follow-up?
developing the relationships and multiple trips and research to understand the prospect's company and challenges. It's all about researching your competition. When it comes to the presentation itself, you squander the time of preparation, rehearsal, and delivery.
Okay, Paul, and if you can come back, but as you can see, these are very interactive formats, and I know Mel put the LinkedIn group, if they want to join, in the chat box. Paul, if you can make sure everyone can see this. And we also ask you a poll, which reminds me of this particular situation that I was talking about, is how many conversations do you have before you have a more formal presentation? So your choices are, 1, is it up to 5 or more than 5? And the more complex your sale, there are going to be more conversations. Because, for example, the story I was talking about, national sales manager came up. I was delivering a presentation. She said, "Patricia, I liked your speech, but I loved how you delivered it. Can you teach our salespeople to speak this way? Because it takes us a year to be in a position to have a 1-hour presentation for a hospital board. It's worth $9 million a year if we get the business. And we are losing sales. It has nothing to do with our product or pricing. It has to do with the presentation skills of our competitors are better than ours." So when you take Andy's advice, you amp up your efforts, you respond fast, you give information, and we both agree you design your conversation and presentation around what's important to them, and the only way you know that is to ask good questions. And as we say in Fripp VT, the quality of the information you receive depends on the quality of your questions. And I know you will be replaying this session regularly to hear Andy's advice, and certainly his 2 books are available on Amazon, and his Zero Selling VT, Zero Time Selling VT, we want you to check out. So let's pick up with the stories that Andy was talking about. I totally agree with exactly what he says. And in Fripp VT, in the sales course, we teach 2 types of stories. One, which is the happy, satisfied clients. And the best advice I can give you is introduce the characters and deliver it in their words. So, for example, when you first met John Smith, the Senior Vice President of Sales at, if he had said, "Patricia, help," how would he have articulated his problem? Now, you might have had a 30-minute conversation to uncover this. It might be 3 conversations till you finally have this one. But in clear, what you're doing is shrinking the conversation, so it's help. What is their problem? And then, as Andy said, well, this is the solution. We did this, and which would be a similar approach to you. And then the success in the end, the happy ever after, I would call it, they deliver it in the client's word. If he were here, he would tell you, hiring Andy Paul was without a doubt the best decision we made this year, because this was our problem. And after his consulting and coaching, we immediately changed this, and this was the result. If you can get in the habit of delivering it in the actual words of the satisfied client, it is as if you are taking your satisfied clients on your sales calls. So that is that. So Andy and I both agree with that. I totally agree with ask questions. And when you start the conversation, when you get to what I would call the presentation, and Paul, just as a matter of interest, can we see how many calls? All right, so 80% are doing a formal presentation, the real conversation, 80%, and 20% it's more of a complex sale. Can we also ask them, Paul, are their presentations in person, virtual, or a combination of both? Just as a matter of interest, because depending on how you answer, I have some advice. When you start the conversation, you've got the pleasantries out the way, I recommend you never thank people for their time. You thank them for the opportunity to discuss how your solution can be the best for them. And I would always start the conversation with congratulations. What are they proud of? And again, because if you've taken Andy's advice and you're really confident, you know what they are, you have an ongoing, what did you call your campaign, the keeping in touch with them, Andy, the
value-based assistance.
Exactly. Good. So you're giving them value, so you do know. Now, 70% of our listeners deliver their presentation in person. 30% it's a combination of both. And many of my clients, in fact, Andy, my biggest VT user, corporate user, they deliver their presentations in webinars. And my advice is turn on your webcam when you're greeting people, perhaps asking the questions. Turn off your webcam if you're having an interactive PowerPoint. Turn the webcam on when you are answering their questions, so you can have a personal connection and you can make good eye contact. Now,
well,
you'll notice...
I would insert this. The point you've made, just to reiterate it, is oftentimes you hear people say, like, yeah, the customer's busy. I said the customer's busy. They don't have time for the personal anymore. Just not true. You still have to keep the personal in it, because ultimately it's a person buying a person. And so, your point precisely, you want to personalize it, you want to engage at a personal level, and then, as you said, as you're making your presentations and you're actually talking to people, come back and engage person, face to face.
Good. Good. And Andy and I both use Zoom meetings, and a lot of my coaching and kickoff meetings for training is in a technology called Zoom, which is it's very interactive. You can both see each other, and when it's easier to build rapport when you're seeing people virtually, it's almost as if you're in their office. So we might, that is virtual, but I guarantee that they'll almost feel like you were in their office. And part of my coaching process, I often say, well, if we were locked in a room together, what presentation would we work on? And then, of course, they might be the other side of the country, and in reality we probably are not going to be in the room together if it's a short time project. So I'll say, well, is this as good as being in the room? And the answer is always yes. So even virtual presentations are now as if they're in person.
Right.
So we are getting close to when we need to thank you, Andy, but Paul, are there any burning questions that we need to answer?
Not right now.
Okay, good. Well, so let's remind you that Andy's books are Amp Up Sales and Zero Time Selling, and the VT system is Zero Time Selling VT.com. Mine is Fripp VT.com. If you want to sign up on your mobile device, 96,000, that's 3 zeros, and you text TRUST for Andy, and then it will tell you there might be a charge for this call, and then you're one click away. You can sign up just online to get your free trial. Same with mine with Fripp. If you want to join the Fripp VT LinkedIn group, we're very active. We encourage you to go to andypaul.com. Andy's podcasts are superb. Not only do you get his expertise, all his daily bringing you sales experts.
Right.
So with that, Andy, what are your concluding comments?
Well, focus on the things that you control. Because you as a salesperson, you're the first line of differentiation between you and your competitors. And so focus on maximizing the value you deliver, accelerate your responsiveness, keep it simple and direct and personal, and you'll win more deals.
Good. And as chapter 1, which you will get in your free trial with Fripp VT, is called, If You Sound the Same as Everybody Else, You Have No Advantage. So now you know, when you have Andy's approach and the Fripp presentation approach, when you use good stories and you build repetition and reinforcement into your life. As far as training is not something you did. Training is something you do on an ongoing basis. Exactly. If you want a competitive edge. Because Andy and I both agree, and you heard from him, there's more competition. You need to amp up sales by sounding good and being better than your competition. Thank you.